Welcome back to Industry Voice by OCT Clinical. Today we will talk to Zakhar Golant, the chairman of the Union of Biomedical and Pharmaceutical Clusters of Russia. We will try to find out the purpose of running pharmaceutical clusters and the challenges behind them, talk about market access opportunities for international pharma in Russia, and discuss what future holds for research and development in the next 5 years. Zakhar, welcome to Industry Voice. Thank you for being with us today. So you are the chairman of the Union of Pharmaceutical and Biomedical Clusters of Russia. Could you please run us through the essence of creating clusters and what is the main purpose of creating projects like that?
Well, actually, the pharmaceutical industry, since the very beginning, it's been more than 10 years ago. So it was the federal strategy, Pharma 2020, when the state decided to develop pharmaceutical industry. So that's why the state has major role in supporting the industry. So it was not just from the industry which was, developing. It was the state which wants the industry to be developed. So that's why this creation of clusters in, let's say, well-developed regions of Russia, such as St. Petersburg, for example, or Moscow region, or Kaluga, or Tatarstan. So it became the process of creating clusters when regional governments, as well as the federal governments, they supported pharmaceutical industry to create their new infrastructure, the facilities, the pharmaceutical plants. So that's why it was not just spread out through the whole country. It was more developed regions which supported the pharmaceutical industry, most players such as global companies or local companies, to initiate creating their production infrastructure. So that's why this whole cluster thing began. The same thing was with the automotive industry, let's say 20 years ago. It was exactly the same process when the federal government, they wanted the automotive industry to be developed, so they created such clusters in most developed industrial and economic regions of Russia.
And what are the main challenges when creating such clusters?
Well, this is about the investment, let's say, policy of the region. So you can declare whatever you want, but the actual market players, they calculate their expenses, they calculate their terms, they calculate their, the cost of labor, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of land, everything, and then whatever the federal government or regional government says. It means whether it can be estimated or calculated by actual players. So again, the main thing is, let's say, terms. I mean, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, to make the project, and then the prediction of the costs of such projects. So that's why not too many regions, they were successful exactly at this approach. And the second thing is the flexibility of regional governments and what they have to offer. In St. Petersburg, exactly because we do live here and mainly we developed the cluster here in St. Petersburg, it was because of the special economic zones. So the federal government and regional government, they already invested several years and several billions of rubles into the engineering infrastructure. So they had what to offer to market players. So once you just want to offer, but you have nothing to offer, for example, you have no land, you have no networks, you have no stimulus such as, tax stimulus or state procurement stimulus, so you have nothing to offer. So that's why you can't attract investments. So that's why the successful clusters such as Moscow and Moscow region and St. Petersburg and Tatarstan, for example, they already had something to offer in terms of the production infrastructure, in terms of land plots and in terms of networks. And then they try to stimulate pharmaceutical companies in terms of tax preferences and state procurement system.
Thank you. That was very thorough. Now I think that our international audience will be excited to hear more about successful collaborations with foreign pharma. We know that a lot of international pharmaceutical companies see great potential in the Russian market, many of which not only localize their production in the Russian Federation, but also see Russian developers as strategic partners in entering local market. So could you please comment on that? Are there any examples?
All the companies, they try to implement different strategies. So some global companies, they invested their money into the pharmaceutical plants all on their own, for example, such as Novartis, such as Novo Nordisk, such as Sanofi Aventis, and some others. So they invested all their money without any like local partners. So this strategy has some advantages, but it has also some drawbacks. And after, it was impossible to tell it from the very beginning. I mean, I'm not saying that it was a mistake or something. So it was quite impossible to say which strategy would be the best, after 10 years. But I would say that now, after all this time, the more, let's say, flexible strategy is finding, for the global company to find a local partner and to share risks of, let's say, investments into the infrastructure and to share risks into the changes in the portfolio, because you can't, predict the exact portfolio like after 5 years or 10 years, because it's the living thing. I mean, the healthcare system and different, let's say, different products and different drugs. They can be either increased amounts or decreased. So, but you can't tell that for sure. So that's why to find a local partner, to find a strategic partnership with like some market player, will help the global company, again, to share risks, both for the portfolio and for the capital investments into the production infrastructure. I would say that more, again, as I was saying, more flexible strategy, it was such as Pfizer or Bayer, for example. They had the strategic partner, which has all the expenses in terms of the production infrastructure. It enjoys some of the technology transfer from the global company. Then it's a big chance for a local company, because to create such a partnership, you have to be not just compliant to the licensing, to the GMP requirements, but you have to be compliant with the audit from the global company, because the global company can't just make a partnership. They want to choose the best company in terms of the, let's say, quality assurance system, and so to reduce any risks of failure in terms of the production, in terms of the product. So that's why I would say that again, not from the very beginning, but after these 10 years, I would say that more flexible strategy is when the global company picks up the strategic partner at the local market. The same thing, and the last year with all this COVID pandemic all over the world, it shows the same actually approach. And now it's, for example, it's not the global company, but it's a Russian-based company with vaccines, for example, which now produce vaccines. They make a lot of registrations throughout the whole world, and they make a lot of technology transfers. So it's the same process, but when 10 or 5 years ago, global companies were interested in Russian market as the emerging market, and so they tried to invest money here and try to find local partners, and were thinking in what particular areas to invest. For example, whether to invest into the production infrastructure, whether to invest in the growth of the portfolio or to clinical trials, for example, or to some marketing activity. And now the same process goes after COVID with, for example, COVID vaccines. When from Russia, companies try to get to export these vaccines, but they make the same thing. So when they go to auto markets, they seek the strategic partnership over there, so not to risk their money and their investments all alone. So they want to transfer these risks to a local partner. So especially Russia is the emerging market. So it's not Europe, it's not European, it's not North American market. But so if we go, for example, with our vaccines, we go also to emerging markets. So it means the high volatility at these markets, it means higher risks at these markets, that you can actually lose all your investments in infrastructure, and also, for example, the regulatory risks of not being registered, for example. So you want to build the infrastructure, but at any time the local Ministry of Health might reject your product, and you are not meeting not your business plans, not terms, not investments, anything. So this is all emerging markets are high volatile markets. So just because of this, again, I am saying that probably again after these 10 years, the more flexible strategy is for a global company in any part of the world to go and find your local partner and share risks.
Thank you. I think our audience will get a lot from this. And since you already started talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, I cannot help but ask regarding the global pandemic, which has really shaken up the industry. How would you evaluate the overall response of key stakeholders, such as Ministry of Health, medical facilities, pharmaceutical companies, and CROs?
Well, I would say that we saw many different effects from this pandemic situation, and what is good and what is the result of the last year is that regulatory, let's say, activity of all local regulators in North America, in Europe, in Russia, it became much more flexible. It became much quicker. So it means the medical devices, it means vaccines, it means new schemes of therapy. It's been much more flexible than at the regular, let's say, than a year ago or 5 years ago, for example. So we saw really quick pace of discussions, regulatory discussions of adopting different products and different therapeutic schemes and new vaccines. So that's why it's really big effect for scientific industry, for R&D, and for new products and let's say new attention that regulatory system. It's not just to prevent new drugs from market. Because before that, it was a big thing for the industry and for regulators, because industry does not want to invest a lot of money into the risky, let's say, drugs. So that's why they want to improve, they want to, let's say, improve existing drugs, give some new qualities, some new applications, some new features to the existing drug. But then it goes for the healthcare system, it goes to higher prices and to higher healthcare system expenditures. So that's why normally regulators, they do reject a lot of these, let's say, improvements, because they're not worth additional money, additional financial burden for the system. But last year, the situation clearly was different, because a lot of companies, they really invested into novel vaccines, into novel medical devices, and regulators, they actually accepted, because everybody was shocked. So that's why I do believe that these effects of the last year will continue for several new years. And probably the whole industry will enjoy new drugs and new therapeutic schemes and new vaccines probably, but that was quick. And again, what was measured at that time is whether it's the whether the system can adopt this risk of, let's say, letting new vaccine with less clinical trials than average to be actually released to the open market. And because now we have the clinical trials, let's say, like after registration of these new products. But I think that this situation is much better than to prevent new products being introduced to the market. So that's why I do think and I do believe that this effect of the last year will continue for at least several more years. And another thing is that it's for the last year and until now, it's a lot of new investments coming into the scientific industry and new R&D process. Not just for existing big companies, but a lot of attention from different companies, different investment funds. They do invest into the existing companies, into new startups companies, into new biotechs. And I think that this attention will last for several more years and will attract much more investments to the industry than before.
And what do you think is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years in the field of clinical research? And how does it compare in Russia and international markets?
Well, again, the market goes to where the state actually invests. So we have the situation when the state in Russia regulates the healthcare system and the state procurement system. It means that once the companies see the direction of the budget expenditures for the healthcare system, they can actually adapt to these expenditures in terms of registering new drugs and new therapies, just because they do know that money go into specific niches, such as, for example, orphan drugs. And one of the biggest initiatives for the state to create the charity fund, the Circle of Good, it clearly defines the priorities of the state that at least as for now, they invest money into the genetic therapies, into the orphan drugs. So that's why I think that in several new years, so we will see much more such drugs and such new therapies entering the market and trying to make clinical trials and trying to register these new drugs, trying to find, let's say, local partners for the distribution of such products. So that's why I think that with such clear initiatives, the budget expenditures of the state as we see it now, it will have the industry respond in new therapies and new research and in new registration.
Thank you, Zakhar. And my last question for today deals with the Pharma 2030 initiative, of which you are a frequent guest and a participant. So how would you comment on the importance of supporting full cycle production on the domestic level and creating competition both on the domestic and international level?
Well, this is a really complex question. It's not just about the pharmaceutical industry. It's about, let's say, now there are a lot of discussions about the deglobalization process and the dependence of all of the world from China and, for example, from India in terms of pharmaceutical substances, in terms of chemical ingredients, in terms of the finished dosage forms, for example. Especially with this pandemic situation, it became clear. And for example, we see two big European initiatives and one new US initiative to create their own infrastructure to produce chemical ingredients to produce pharmaceutical substances. Such as 2 years ago, it was a big initiative from the company Sanofi Aventis. Last year, it was from Lonza, also in Europe. It means that the world realizes that this dependency is critical. And it has not only just an economic value, but also it has economic value. Just because, for example, in China there's a really big ecological reform, and they rebuilt their chemical plants, they rebuilt their pharmaceutical ingredients plants, and the production becomes more and more expensive. So it's not going to be just as cheap as it was. I mean, if we see the long-term tendency, trends, so we see that all the chemical ingredients and all the pharmaceutical substances, so the price becomes higher and higher. So it has the economic value, and it will cost higher and higher, just because of the cost of labor, just because of the new ecological standards in China, and just because, again, it's not just about pharmaceutical industry, it's about all chemical industry, let's say. Then we see that it becomes not just the economic or industrial thing, it becomes more of a political thing. For example, again, coming back to the pandemic situation, the situation with the vaccines. I mean, the states, for example, which could pay more than other states, they got their vaccines faster. For example, like Israel or like United States. So the states, the emerging markets, for example, which has no such financial ability to pay more, like at the auction, so they have the big delays in all the vaccines and all the economic and social results of this. So that's why this political situation with China, with India, with the United States, with Europe, and Russia in this case, again, we see that the political situation is getting more and more critical, and it influences the industrial development, it influences the economic things. So that's why, coming back to the question about the Pharma 2030, the pandemic situation just made it much more clear that this tendency to localizing production, to local APIs, for example, to local chemical ingredients, it's not just the industrial thing, it's the more of an economical and political thing. And it's not just for Russia, it's for all other, for the rest of the world. So this is the big tendency for major industries, let's say, when national systems such as European system or US system, or for example Russia and CIS countries, they would tend to be more independent in critical products, in main vaccines, in oncology and insulins. So it doesn't matter that all the products, that all the let's say pharmaceutical market has to be localized, but it has to be let's say the pharmaceutical safety, that in major niches the country could support itself on its own, no matter what's the political situation, what's the, let's say, deglobalization process, whatever. So I think that this key thing for the Pharma 2030 strategy, it just, it was right at several years ago when it was discussed. And now I do believe that this, in 5 or 10 years, it will become much more clear that this decision was right.
Zakhar, I think we can wrap it up here. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights. I'm sure our audience will get a lot from this.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you would like to be our next guest speaker, reach out. You can find the right email in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe.